There's a moment when people think they've finally broken you, when they take your home, your security, your dignity, and they wait. They wait for tears. They wait for begging. They wait for you to collapse right in front of them. That's the moment I surprised everyone. Because when my own family took everything from me, I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I let them believe they'd won. What they didn't know was that I was already planning the one move that would change all of our lives forever. Let me take you back to the day everything changed. I was sitting in the lawyer's office when my son Michael told me I was no longer needed. Those were his exact words. Not that I was stepping down, not that they were taking over, that I was no longer needed. He said it the way you'd tell a housekeeper her services were no longer required. Professional, distant, as if 53 years of my life had just been a temporary position I'd held at the family company his grandfather built from nothing, the company I'd run for 27 years after my husband died. My daughter-in-law Jennifer sat beside him, her hand on his knee, that sympathetic tilt to her head that I'd learned to recognize as theatre. She wore the Cartier bracelet I'd given her last Christmas. Michael wore his father's cufflinks, the ones I'd had made for our 25th anniversary, just 3 months before the heart attack took him. I remember thinking how strange it was that they'd dressed up in our gifts to deliver this particular message, like wearing someone's clothes to their funeral. The lawyer, a young man I didn't recognize, slid papers across the mahogany table. Michael had hired him specifically for this meeting, not our family attorney of 30 years. Someone new, someone who didn't know me, someone who saw me as Michael wanted me to be seen. An elderly woman past her prime, holding on to power she could no longer handle. I didn't cry. I know they expected me to. Jennifer had positioned a box of tissues on the table before I arrived. I noticed because the box wasn't there when I'd walked past the conference room 10 minutes earlier, checking my reflection in the window, smoothing my grey hair that I'd stopped colouring 2 years ago. Michael said it made me look dignified. I understand now he meant it made me look old. Mum, Michael said, his voice softening the way it used to when he was 7 and had broken something valuable and was trying to determine how much trouble he was in. This isn't about you. The company needs fresh energy, new direction. You've done an incredible job, but it's time to let the next generation take over. The next generation. He was 49. I'd been running a $30 million operation since I was 46, when I'd never worked a day in my life before my husband died, when everyone expected me to sell, to take the money and fade into comfortable widowhood. When the board of directors had looked at me with that same sympathetic head tilt Jennifer was giving me now, I'd taught myself accounting, business law, supply chain management. I'd read until 3 in the morning and woke at 5. I'd fired men who called me sweetheart in meetings and hired women who were smarter than I was. I'd tripled revenue in 5 years. By year 10, we'd expanded into 6 states. The company my husband built with his hands and his father's small inheritance became the company I built with spreadsheets and strategy and an absolute refusal to be what anyone expected. Michael knew all of this. He'd been there. He'd watched me work through dinner, through holidays, through my own mother's funeral when I took calls in the parking lot of the cemetery because a merger was closing and 60 jobs depended on it going through. I understand, I said. Those were my only words in that meeting. I signed what they put in front of me. I didn't read it. I already knew what it said. They'd left a copy on my desk 3 days earlier. They thought I wouldn't notice it beneath a stack of quarterly reports. They didn't know I noticed everything. That's how you run a company everyone wants you to fail at. You notice everything. The papers gave me a generous severance, a consulting fee for 6 months, though we all knew they'd never consult me, a retirement package that would keep me comfortable until I died, which their actuarial analysis probably predicted would be within 7 to 10 years. Women in my family lived into their 90s, but they didn't know that. They'd never asked about my family, my history, anything that didn't serve their immediate purpose. Jennifer stood and came around the table. She hugged me. I smelled her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same one I wore. She'd started wearing it about a year ago, around the time she'd started sitting in on board meetings, taking notes, asking questions that sounded innocent but were mapping territory. "We'll still see you all the time," she said into my hair. "You're not losing your family. You're just gaining free time. Time to travel, to enjoy yourself. Don't you want that? I did want that. I'd wanted it for years. I'd wanted to see Prague in winter and the Northern Lights, and my college roommate in Seattle, who I hadn't visited in a decade because there was always another crisis, another opportunity, another reason I was indispensable. But I'd wanted to choose it, to leave on my own terms, to hand over something I'd built to someone who valued it, who understood what it cost, who wouldn't treat it like an inheritance they were owed, rather than a responsibility they'd earned. Michael hadn't earned it. He'd worked at the company for 6 years, in positions I'd created for him: marketing director, VP of operations, titles that sounded impressive, but involved delegating work to people who actually understood the business. He was good at lunches, at golf games with clients, at being charming and affable, and making people feel good about giving us their money. Those were valuable skills. They weren't the same skills you needed to run a company through a recession, a supply chain collapse, and the death of institutional knowledge as older employees retired. But he was my son, my only child, and he wanted this. He'd wanted it for years. I'd seen it in how he talked about when I'm running things, as if my tenure was a waiting period he was enduring rather than a partnership we were building. So I let him have it. I cleaned out my office on a Friday evening. Michael had offered to help, but I'd declined. Jennifer had offered to pack things for me, which I also declined. I didn't want their hands on my things, their pity, their performance of caring while counting down the minutes until I was gone and they could redecorate. There wasn't much to take. I'd never been one for personal items at work. A photo of Michael at his college graduation, one of my husband on our wedding day, black and white, his smile so wide it still broke my heart 40 years later. A glass paperweight my mother-in-law had given me the first Christmas after her son died, with a note that said, "You're stronger than you know." She'd been right about that. I packed them in a small cardboard box and left my keys on the desk. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already said in 27 years of quarterly reports and strategic plans and emails sent at midnight, because insomnia had become my default state. The drive home took 12 minutes. I'd timed it so many times I could predict the traffic lights. My house was dark. I'd stopped leaving lights on years ago when I realized I was the only one who noticed whether they were on or off. Michael had moved out at 22, married Jennifer at 28, moved into a house 3 towns away where they were raising my 2 grandchildren I saw once a month if I was lucky, twice a month if Jennifer's mother was out of town and unavailable for babysitting. I sat in my car in the garage for 20 minutes before going inside. The box on the passenger seat felt heavier than it should have. 3 items, 40 years. The math didn't work, but math rarely does when you're calculating the weight of a life. If you're listening to this while you're folding laundry or driving or lying awake at night, wondering if anyone else understands what it feels like to be invisible in your own story, thank you. Thank you for being here, for listening. This community of women who support each other has meant more to me than you could know. If you're moved to, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes I think about all of us scattered across time zones and continents, living such different lives but understanding the same truths. If you know someone who needs to hear this, who needs to know she's not alone in feeling discarded, please share this with her. These stories matter. Your story matters. Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it, clean, organized, empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. I poured myself a glass of wine I didn't drink and sat in the living room I rarely used, in the chair my husband had bought the year before he died, because he said I needed somewhere comfortable to read. That wasn't the bed or the office. I'd barely sat in it. There'd never been time. Now I had nothing but time. The first week was strange. I woke at 5 from habit and had nowhere to go. I made coffee and read the news and felt unmoored. The second week was worse. I started sleeping later, which sounds like a luxury but felt like failure. By the third week, I'd stopped setting an alarm entirely. Michael called every few days, perfunctory check-ins. "How are you, Mum? Enjoying retirement?" Always during his lunch hour, which I knew from the background noise of the restaurant where he took clients every Tuesday. Never long enough for a real conversation, just long enough to check a box labeled "Dutiful Son." Jennifer sent photos of the grandchildren, group texts to both me and her own mother. So I was always one of multiple recipients, never special, never singular. The photos were lovely, professional even. Jennifer had a good eye. The children were growing up beautiful and polite and distant. I sent back heart emojis, because that's what grandmothers do in group texts. What else was there to say? A month after I left, Michael called on a Wednesday morning, not during lunch hour. I felt a flutter of something, concern, maybe, or hope that something was wrong enough that he actually needed me. "Hey, Mum," he said, and I could hear papers rustling, multitasking. "Quick question. Do you remember the contact information for the Denver distributor, the main guy we worked with?" I did remember. I remembered everything about the Denver account, because I'd negotiated it personally after their previous supplier had failed and left them in a bind. I'd flown out on a Tuesday, met with their CEO on Wednesday, closed the deal by Thursday morning. I remembered his name, his assistant's name, his preferences for breakfast meetings over lunch, the photo of his daughter's soccer team on his desk. "I'm sure it's in the files," I said. "Yeah, I checked. Can't find it. Jennifer's looking too. I thought maybe you had it written down somewhere. Try the CRM system under regional partnerships. Should be tagged with my initials." "Right. Okay." More rustling. "Thanks. How are you doing? Staying busy?" "Very," I lied. "Good, good. We should do dinner soon. The kids keep asking about you." They didn't. I knew they didn't, because Jennifer had posted on Facebook about their weekend activities. Trampoline park, pizza party, Jennifer's mother's house for Sunday dinner. No mention of me. No questions from children who barely knew me. "That would be lovely," I said. We never scheduled it. The calls started coming more frequently after that. Small questions, clarifications, things they couldn't find or didn't understand. I answered them all briefly, pleasantly. I didn't elaborate. I didn't offer to come in. I didn't remind them that consulting was part of my severance package and they were getting free advice. I just answered the questions. In the 4th month, Michael called on a Sunday. That got my attention. Michael protected his weekends fiercely. Golf on Saturday morning, family time in the afternoon, church on Sunday, or what passed for church, which was brunch at the country club, followed by watching football. "Mum, I need to talk to you about something." His voice was different, tight, the way it got when he was 12 and had to tell me he'd failed a math test. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. It's just, the board wants to make some changes, modernize some of our processes. Jennifer's been taking some business courses and she has some ideas about efficiency and—" "What's wrong, Michael?" I repeated. Silence. Then, "The 3rd quarter numbers weren't great, but it's not a big deal. Every company has slow periods. It's just the economy, the market. You know how it is." I did know how it was. The economy was actually strong. Our market sector was up 17% year over year. I still read the trade publications. I hadn't stopped paying attention just because I'd stopped being paid. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "Right. Yeah. It's just, did we ever have issues with the Hoffman account? Like, did they ever threaten to leave or anything?" The Hoffman account. 32 million over 5 years. Our 2nd largest client. I'd brought them on personally 8 years ago after their CEO heard me speak at a conference. I'd had coffee with him quarterly ever since, not because the contract required it, but because relationships matter, because people don't leave companies they feel connected to. Not that I recall. Why? They're talking about going with a different supplier, something about wanting a more personalized approach. I thought we gave them that. I mean, we have all the same services you set up. Services aren't relationships. Systems aren't people. But I didn't say that. When did they tell you this? Jennifer got an email last week. She handles a lot of the client communication now. Jennifer, who'd never met Mr. Hoffman, who didn't know he was recovering from knee surgery and his daughter was getting married in the spring, and his wife collected Depression-era glassware and appreciated when I sent her articles about estate sales. "I see," I said. "Can you think of anything we should do? Any ideas?" I could think of many things. I could think of calling Mr. Hoffman myself, personally, and having a conversation human to human instead of company to company. I could think of sending a handwritten note acknowledging that change was hard and asking if there was anything we could do better. I could think of a dozen small gestures that cost nothing but time and attention. "I'm sure Jennifer will handle it," I said. "She's very capable." Michael made a sound that might have been agreement or relief or something else I couldn't interpret over the phone. After we hung up, I sat looking at my phone for a long time. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to Hoffman's number. My finger hovered over it. One call. That's all it would take. One call, and I could probably salvage the relationship, save the account, save Michael from his first major client loss. I put the phone down. This was no longer my company, no longer my problem. They'd made that clear. I was no longer needed, so I let them not need me. 2 weeks later, the Hoffman account left. Michael called to tell me, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't understand it," he said. "We gave them everything they wanted. Better pricing than you ever offered. Faster turnaround times. Jennifer even set up a new customer portal so they could track everything online. Everything except what they actually wanted, which was to matter, to be seen, to be more than an account number in a system. I'm sorry," I said, and I was. Not for Michael, for Mr. Hoffman, who'd probably made the decision reluctantly, sadly, missing the relationship he'd had with a company that used to feel like a partnership. "The board's pretty upset," Michael said. "They're questioning some of our other changes, too. It's like they don't trust me to run things." "Give them time," I said. "Trust is earned." "You always trusted me," he said, and there was something childlike in his voice, something seeking reassurance. "I'm your mother," I said. "That's different." We hung up shortly after. I realized we hadn't talked about me once during the entire conversation. Not how I was spending my time, not how I was adjusting to retirement, not whether I was lonely in this house that had become a museum of a life I used to live. I wasn't lonely. That surprised me. I'd expected to be. I'd expected the silence to be suffocating. Instead, it was clarifying. Without the noise of running the company, without the constant demands and crises and phone calls, I could hear myself think. I could remember who I was before I became the woman who saved the company, before I became the widow who proved everyone wrong, before I became the mother whose son thought she was disposable. I started going to the library. I hadn't been to a library in decades. Everything I needed for work had been digital, delivered, purchased. But the library in town was beautiful. Old Carnegie building, high ceilings, that particular smell of paper and possibility. I got a card. The librarian, a woman about my age with kind eyes and grey hair cut sensibly short, smiled at me like I'd done something wonderful rather than something anyone could do. "Welcome," she said. "What brings you in today?" "I have time now," I said. "I'd like to use it." I started with fiction, books I'd been meaning to read for years, big, thick novels that required attention and commitment. I read in the mornings with coffee. I read in the afternoons in the chair my husband had bought me. I read in the evenings until my eyes grew tired and the words blurred. I read books about women who left marriages and started over, women who ran away, and women who stayed and fought, women who were underestimated and overlooked, and who found ways to matter that had nothing to do with whether anyone was paying attention. The reading filled something in me I hadn't known was empty. At month 6, my consulting fee ended. Michael didn't mention it. Neither did I. The calls had slowed to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. Always about problems, never about solutions. He wanted me to tell him what to do without admitting he needed help. I gave him general advice that could apply to anything. I didn't give him the specific insights that came from knowing the company's history, its culture, the unwritten rules that made it function. Those insights, I was starting to understand, weren't things you could download or transfer. They were things you earned through years of showing up, paying attention, caring about details that seemed insignificant until they suddenly became critical. Jennifer called one evening in month 7. That was unusual. Jennifer never called me directly. "Hi, Mum." She'd started calling me Mum about a year into her marriage to Michael. It had felt presumptuous then. It felt hollow now. "How are you?" "I'm well. How are the children?" "They're great. Growing so fast. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. We're having a birthday party for Emma next month. She's turning 7, can you believe it? And we'd love for you to come." 7. My granddaughter was turning 7, and I'd seen her maybe 5 times this year. I'd sent presents for every occasion, cards with checks that were probably deposited without much comment. I was the grandmother who sent money, the one who used to be important, but wasn't anymore. "I'd be delighted," I said. "Wonderful. It's at 2 on the 16th. Oh, and Mum, one more thing. We wanted to ask you something. The kids want to start calling Jennifer's mother Grandma, and we thought, well, it might be less confusing if you were something else, maybe Nana or Mimi. Jennifer's mum has always been grandma to them, and I stopped listening. The words continued, but they stopped meaning anything. My granddaughter was turning 7, and they wanted to demote me from grandmother to nana, to make room, to reduce confusion. There was no confusion. There was only replacement. Whatever the children are comfortable with, I said. Oh, good. I'm so glad you understand. You're so good about these things. So flexible. Flexible. The word people use when they mean you don't object to being bent. I went to the party. I brought a generous gift. A dollhouse Emma had mentioned wanting 6 months ago in one of our brief encounters. The kind of gift a grandmother gives when she's paying attention, when she remembers, when she's trying to matter. Emma opened it in a pile of presents, smiled politely, said thank you, Nana, with the careful pronunciation of a child using a new word, and moved on to the next gift. Jennifer's mother, Grandma, helped her set it up later. I watched from the patio where I was sitting with other adults who didn't quite know what to say to me. I was no longer the company owner, no longer the woman with power and position. I was just someone's elderly mother, taking up space at a party. I left early. No one tried to stop me. The next board meeting, I wasn't there, but I heard about it from Eleanor, one of the long-time board members who'd served since my husband's time. She called me 3 days after. Margaret, she said, and her voice was heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. I thought you should know. Michael presented a plan to restructure the company. He wants to outsource the manufacturing. My stomach went cold. The manufacturing was the heart of the business. It was what my father-in-law had started in a garage in 1952, what my husband had expanded into a factory that employed 200 people, in a town where good jobs were scarce, what I'd modernized and improved while keeping every single person employed, even through the recession, when it would have been cheaper to cut staff. All of it, I asked. All of it. Move everything overseas. Cut costs by 40%. He says it's the only way to stay competitive. What did the board say? We're divided. Some of the newer members think it makes financial sense. Some of us remember what this company is supposed to stand for, what it was supposed to stand for. Legacy, community, quality, things that couldn't be measured on a spreadsheet, but mattered nonetheless. Did you vote? We tabled it. Wanted more information. Michael's bringing in consultants next month to make the case. Consultants. People who didn't know the company, didn't know the town, didn't know the workers who'd been there for decades. People who would see numbers and nothing else. Thank you for telling me, I said. Margaret, Eleanor paused. We could use your voice on this. You could come to the meeting, speak to the board. I no longer have a seat on the board. You could be invited. As a consultant, you're still within the consulting window in your severance package. I was, technically, though Michael had made it clear he considered that window closed. I don't think Michael would appreciate that, I said. I don't think Michael is thinking clearly, Eleanor said. But it's your choice. After we hung up, I sat with the information. 200 jobs. Families who counted on those paychecks. Bob in quality control, who'd been there 38 years. Maria in packaging, who'd brought me homemade tamales every Christmas. Young people who'd started straight out of high school and learned skills that gave them dignity and purpose. All of it, about to be traded for cost savings. I could stop it. One phone call to Eleanor, one appearance at a board meeting, one speech about legacy and responsibility, and the difference between a company and a bottom line. But I'd been asked to leave, told I was no longer needed, replaced by someone who thought I was obsolete. So I did nothing. I let them win. The restructuring passed the board vote 3 months later. Split decision. Eleanor called to tell me, and I could hear her crying. She resigned from the board 2 weeks after that. Said she couldn't be part of dismantling something she'd helped build. I sent her flowers. We met for lunch. We didn't talk about the company. We talked about her grandchildren and my reading and the garden she was planning for spring. We talked about anything except the thing that had brought us together, the slow collapse of something we'd both loved. Michael called the day the factory closing was announced. The news had made the local paper. 200 jobs lost. A building that had stood for 70 years, shuttered. The town's largest employer gone. I tried to save as many positions as possible, he said. Some of them will transition to logistics, administrative roles. It's not ideal, but it's the reality of modern business. The reality of modern business. As if reality was something that happened to you, rather than something you created through choices. I'm sure you did what you thought was best, I said. The board supported it. Some of them. The majority. Yes. Silence. You could have helped, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. Eleanor said she asked you to come speak. You could have made a difference. There it was. The accusation I'd been waiting for. This was my fault. My failure to save him from his own decision. You told me I was no longer needed, I said quietly. I didn't mean that was about operations, not. You meant exactly what you said, Michael. You wanted me gone so you could run things your way. This is your way. You're angry. No, I said. And I meant it. I'm not angry. I'm sad. But I'm not angry. He didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I. We hung up shortly after. The months following were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. The local news ran stories about families struggling after the plant closure. I saw people I knew at the grocery store, people who'd worked for us, who I'd known by name, and they looked through me as if I'd betrayed them. Maybe I had. Maybe choosing not to fight was its own kind of betrayal. I thought about that a lot during the long winter evenings. I thought about responsibility and intervention, and the difference between helping and enabling. I thought about Michael, who'd never had to fail at anything because I'd always been there to catch him, who'd never learned resilience because he'd never needed it. I thought about whether I'd done him a kindness or a cruelty by letting him face the consequences of his decisions. I didn't know. I still don't. What I did know was this. I was tired of being needed, tired of being the solution to other people's problems, tired of my value being measured by my usefulness. So I stopped trying to be useful. I started trying to be whole. I joined a book club at the library. 8 women, all around my age, who met monthly to discuss novels and drink wine and talk about anything except what we used to be. We talked about who we were becoming, what we wanted from the years we had left. I started painting. I'd loved art in college, but had given it up after marriage, after motherhood, after life became about everyone else's needs. I was terrible at first. My perspective was off, my colors muddy, my brushstrokes hesitant, but I kept doing it. Every morning I painted, small canvases, simple subjects, the view from my window, the tree in my backyard, a bowl of fruit I'd arranged on the kitchen table. I painted not to be good, but to be present, to pay attention, to notice the way light changed throughout the day, the way shadows fell, the way color itself was never solid, but always shifting depending on what surrounded it. It was the most peaceful I'd been in decades. Michael's calls became less frequent, once a month, then every 6 weeks. He never asked about me. He talked about problems at the company, declining revenue, employee turnover, contracts being lost. He talked about stress and pressure and how hard it was. He never once admitted he'd made mistakes, never asked what I would have done differently, never acknowledged that maybe, possibly, running a company required more than confidence and a good golf game. I listened. I made sympathetic noises. I didn't offer solutions. This drove him crazy. I could hear it in his voice, the frustration building. He wanted me to tell him what to do, to fix it, to take responsibility for the problems he'd created. I didn't. For the first time in my life, I let my child struggle without rushing in to save him. It felt cruel. It felt necessary. It felt like love, though I'm not sure he would see it that way. Year 2 of my retirement brought changes I hadn't expected. The company was sold. Michael announced it in a family email, brief, professional, explaining that a larger corporation had made an offer he couldn't refuse, that the company would continue under new ownership, that this was the best path forward for everyone. The email didn't mention that the company had lost money for 3 consecutive quarters, that clients had been leaving steadily, that the sale price was roughly half what the company had been worth when I'd left. The email didn't mention failure, but failure was what it was. Michael called me that evening, not to tell me about the sale. I'd already gotten the email, to ask if I was disappointed in him. It was the first honest question he'd asked me in 2 years. "Are you disappointed in yourself?" I asked. Long silence. Then, "Yes, then that's what matters." "I thought I could do it," he said, and his voice sounded young, vulnerable, like the boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared. "I thought I understood how it all worked. I watched you all those years. I thought I knew. Watching isn't the same as doing. I know that now." A pause. I'm sorry, Mum, for how I treated you. You deserved better. I'd waited 2 years to hear those words. I'd imagined how they'd feel. I'd thought they'd bring relief or vindication or satisfaction. Instead, they just made me sad. Thank you, I said. That means something. Does it? He sounded uncertain. Because I feel like I destroyed everything you built, everything Dad and Grandpa built, and I'm not sure saying sorry fixes that. It doesn't fix it, I said, but it's a start. We talked longer that night than we had in years. Really talked. About his fear of not measuring up, about the pressure he'd felt to prove himself, about Jennifer's influence and the board's pressure, and all the ways he'd convinced himself that being aggressive was the same as being strong. He cried at one point. My 51-year-old son cried on the phone, and I sat in my chair in the dark and listened and didn't try to make him feel better. I just let him feel what he was feeling. When we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at the paintings I'd done that week. They were getting better. Not good, maybe, but better, more confident, more myself. I thought about how long it had taken me to learn to be confident in my work at the company, how many failures I'd had to survive, how many times I'd made wrong decisions and had to fix them, learn from them, become better because of them. Michael had never had that. I'd protected him from failure. I'd caught every fall before he hit the ground. And then, when I stepped away, when I stopped catching him, he'd fallen so hard he couldn't get back up. Maybe that was my failure too. Maybe in trying to give him everything, I'd given him nothing that mattered. The woman who bought my old house called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't known the house had sold until she called. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, "my name is Sarah Chen. I just purchased your former home, the one on Riverside Drive. I found some boxes in the attic that belong to you, photo albums, some old documents. I wasn't sure if you'd want them. I'd forgotten about those boxes. I'd put them up there years ago, meaning to sort through them someday. Someday had never come. I can pick them up if that's convenient," I said. "Actually, I was wondering if you might come by. I'd love to meet you. The neighbors have told me so much about you and your husband, about what you meant to this community." I almost declined. The house wasn't mine anymore. Going back felt like visiting a grave, but something in her voice, genuine warmth, real interest, made me say yes. The house looked different. She'd painted, changed the landscaping, made it hers in ways that were both familiar and foreign. She was young, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She'd made tea. We sat in the kitchen where I'd raised my son and mourned my husband and made 10,000 meals that were eaten and forgotten. She asked me about the house's history, about the neighborhood, about my life there, and I told her, not the abbreviated version I usually offered, the real story, about love and loss, and learning to be strong when strong was the only option, about building something from nothing and then watching someone else dismantle it, about choosing to step back and let failure teach lessons I couldn't. She listened without judgment, without trying to fix or explain or minimize. When I finished, she poured more tea and said, "I work in education. I see this with parents all the time. They want to protect their children from every struggle. But struggle is how we learn who we are, how we develop resilience. You gave your son a gift by stepping back." "It didn't feel like a gift," I said. "It felt like abandonment." "Maybe it was both," she said gently. "Maybe the best gifts sometimes feel cruel." I took the boxes home, spent the evening going through them. Photos of my wedding, of Michael as a baby, a toddler, a teenager, of my husband, young and healthy and full of dreams, of the early years of the company when it was just him and his father and 3 employees working out of a building that barely qualified as a warehouse. I found a letter my husband had written me the week before he died. I didn't remember him writing it. It was in a sealed envelope with my name on it, tucked into a photo album. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Margaret," it said, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for that. Sorry to leave you. Sorry to leave Michael. Sorry to leave all the tomorrows we should have had together. But I'm not sorry for the life we built, for the company we created, for the son we raised, for the love that made every day worthwhile. I know you're afraid. I know you think you can't do this without me. But I've watched you for 27 years, and I know something you haven't learned yet. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You're stronger than me, smarter than me, better than me in every way that matters. The company will be fine because you'll make it fine. Michael will be fine because you'll teach him what he needs to know. And you'll be fine because you don't know any other way to be. But here's what I want you to remember. Being strong doesn't mean never failing. It means getting up after you fail. And it means letting the people you love get up after they fail too. Don't carry them. Teach them to carry themselves. I love you. I've always loved you. I'll always love you. Build something beautiful. Then let it go when it's time. Yours. Always. David. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet where I could carry it with me. Let it go when it's time. I'd let go of the company. I'd let go of being needed. I'd let go of the identity I'd built for 27 years. But I hadn't let go of the anger, the hurt, the sense that I'd been wronged. David was right. He was always right about the important things. It was time to let that go, too. I called Michael the next morning. I'd like to take you and Jennifer and the kids to dinner, I said. My treat, wherever the children would enjoy. He sounded surprised, wary. That would be nice. When? This weekend. Saturday, if that works. I'll check with Jennifer. A pause. Mom, is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. I just miss my family. Saturday came. We went to a loud chain restaurant the children loved. The kind of place with crayons and balloons and waiters who sang birthday songs to strangers. Emma was 7 now. Tyler was 9. They barely knew me, but they were polite, well-mannered children who said please and thank you and answered questions with full sentences. I watched them throughout dinner, watched Michael, watching Jennifer, watching the kids, saw the anxiety in how he monitored their behavior, the tension in Jennifer's shoulders, the weight of trying to be perfect that I recognized because I'd carried it for decades. Emma, I said, during a lull in conversation, your mother tells me you're learning piano. Emma nodded. I'm not very good yet. That's because you're still learning, I said. Being not very good is part of how we get to be good. She looked at me with her father's eyes, my husband's eyes, considering this. Did you have to not be good at things before you got good at them? She asked. All the time, I said. I'm still not good at lots of things. I just started painting, and I'm terrible at it. But I keep doing it anyway because I enjoy it. Why do you enjoy being terrible at something? It was such an honest question, such a child's question. Because being terrible means I'm learning, and learning means I'm growing, and growing means I'm alive. Jennifer smiled at that, a real smile. That's beautiful, she said. We talked more easily after that, not about the company, not about the past, about the present, about Emma's piano recital and Tyler's soccer team and Jennifer's new job. She'd started working part-time at a non-profit after the company sold. Michael was consulting now, helping small businesses with operations. It's humbling, he said, working with people who are just starting out, seeing them make the same mistakes I made, trying to help them avoid the pitfalls. Do they listen? I asked. Sometimes. Sometimes they have to learn the hard way, like I did. Our eyes met. Understanding passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take time, but acknowledgement, recognition, the beginning of something that might eventually become repair. When dinner ended and we stood in the parking lot saying goodbye, Emma hugged me, actually hugged me, not the polite, obligatory embrace I'd gotten used to. Will you come to my piano recital, Nana? She asked. Nana, the name I'd been assigned, the diminished role, the replacement title. But Emma said it with love, with actual want, with a child's simple desire to have her grandmother there. I wouldn't miss it, I said. I went to the recital 3 weeks later, sat in an auditorium full of parents and grandparents and siblings, listening to children fumble through scales and simple songs. Emma played a halting version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and forgot the notes halfway through and had to start over. She finished. The audience applauded. She bowed solemnly and walked off stage, and when she saw me in the crowd, she smiled so wide it broke my heart. After, in the lobby, she ran to me first, before her parents, before Jennifer's mother, who was also there, also clapping, also proud. Did you see? Emma asked. I messed up, but I kept going. You did, I said. That's the hardest part, keeping going when you mess up. That's what my teacher says too, she paused. You really paint, even though you're not good at it? I really do. Can I see sometime? I looked at Michael, at Jennifer. They nodded. I'd like that, I said. Emma came over the following weekend. Just Emma, not the whole family. She wanted to see the paintings, she said. wanted to try painting herself. I set up my small studio, really just a corner of the dining room I didn't use, with 2 easels and paints and canvases. I showed her my work. She studied it seriously, the way children do when they're truly interested. "These are good," she said. "They're getting better. This one's my favorite." She pointed to a painting I'd done of my garden in winter. Bare branches, grey sky, everything dormant and waiting. "Why that one?" I asked. "Because it's peaceful, like it's sleeping, but it's going to wake up." 7 years old, and she understood what I'd been trying to capture. The patience of dormancy, the promise of spring, the knowledge that empty doesn't mean dead. We painted together that afternoon. She was terrible, as all beginners are. She got frustrated, wanted to quit, asked why it didn't look like what she wanted it to look like. "Because you're learning," I said, "and learning is messy." She painted 3 canvases, each one slightly better than the last. Not good, but better. When Michael came to pick her up, she showed him proudly. "Nana says being terrible is part of learning," she announced. Michael looked at me over her head. Something complicated moved across his face. "Nana's right," he said quietly. Emma came back the next weekend, and the next. It became a routine. Saturday mornings, she came to paint. We didn't talk much while we worked. We just painted side by side, 2 people learning together, neither one expert, both trying. On the 4th week, she said, "Tyler wants to come too. He says it's not fair I get to do special things with you." "Tyler's welcome," I said. The next Saturday, both children came. Tyler didn't want to paint. He wanted to hear stories. Stories about when his dad was little. Stories about his grandfather. Stories about the company and the factory and what it was like to run a business. I told him, honestly, about the hard parts and the good parts, and how sometimes the two were the same thing. "Were you scared?" he asked. "When Grandpa died and you had to take over?" "Terrified," I said. "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." "That's brave," he said. Then, after thinking, Dad was scared too. When he was running the company, I heard him and Mum talking about it at night. He said he didn't know what he was doing. I'd known that. But hearing it from Tyler, from this child who'd absorbed his father's anxiety through walls and whispered conversations, made it real in a different way. Being scared and doing something anyway. "That's what brave means," I said. Tyler nodded seriously. Emma added a flower to her painting. The afternoon light came through the windows and made everything soft. This became my life. Not the life I'd planned. Not the life I'd built through decades of work and sacrifice. A smaller life. A quieter life. But a life that was mine. I still read. I still painted. I still went to book club and had lunch with Eleanor and Sarah from my old house. I volunteered at the library. I took a watercolor class at the community center. I learned to garden properly instead of just maintaining the landscaping. I learned to be a person instead of a position. Michael and I talked more regularly. Not every day, not even every week, but regularly. Real conversations about real things. He asked my advice sometimes, about business, about parenting, about life. I gave it when I had something useful to say. I admitted when I didn't. "I'm thinking about starting something new," he said one evening. We were having coffee at a cafe downtown, just the 2 of us. Small manufacturing, local focus. Nothing like before, but something I can build slowly. Do right. "What would you make?" "Furniture. Custom pieces. There's a market for it. And I like working with my hands." I forgot that. Forgot that Dad started the company because he loved making things, not because he wanted to run a business. "Do you have the capital?" "Some. From the sale. Not much, but enough to start small." "Start small," I agreed. "Learn as you go. Fail at the small things before you try the big things." He smiled. "That's what I'm learning. Finally. Better late than never." "Is it though?" He looked at me seriously. All those people who lost their jobs. The town that lost its employer. The legacy that's gone. Is it really better late than never? I thought about this. Really thought about it. "Yes," I said finally. "Because you learned it. Some people never do. They keep making the same mistakes. Keep blaming others. Keep refusing to see their part in how things fell apart. You're not doing that. You're looking clearly at what happened and taking responsibility and trying to do better. That matters. Does it make up for the harm?" "No," I said honestly, "but it's still worth doing." He started the furniture business 6 months later. Small operation. him and two employees working out of a rented workshop. I went to see it once, at his invitation. It reminded me of the early days of his grandfather's company, the smell of sawdust and oil, the sound of tools, the satisfaction of building something with your hands. Michael showed me a desk he was working on, custom commission, cherry wood, clean lines, beautiful. "It's good work," I said. "I'm learning," he said, "but I'm getting better." I heard my own words reflected back to me, the cycle completing, the lesson learned. On my 72nd birthday, my small house filled with people, Michael and Jennifer and the children, Eleanor and Sarah and women from my book club, even a few old employees from the company, people who'd stayed in touch, who remembered, who didn't blame me for what had happened. Emma made me a card. Tyler baked cookies with Jennifer. Michael brought flowers. They sang happy birthday badly, and I blew out candles and made a wish I didn't voice. Later, when most people had left and I was cleaning up with Jennifer, she said quietly, "I'm sorry for how we pushed you out, for making you feel disposable. You weren't disposable. You were everything." I stopped washing dishes and looked at her. "Thank you for saying that. I should have said it years ago." I was so focused on Michael's feelings, on supporting him, on helping him prove himself. I didn't think about what it cost you, what it cost the company, what it cost everyone. You were being a good wife. I could have been a good wife and a good daughter-in-law. They weren't mutually exclusive. I just didn't try. We finished the dishes in silence. Before she left, she hugged me, really hugged me. Not politely, not obligatorily, with actual affection. "The kids love their Saturdays with you," she said. "They talk about you all week, about painting and stories and how Nana says it's okay to be bad at things. It is okay to be bad at things. I'm learning that too, finally." After everyone left, I sat in my chair, my husband's chair, the one I'd barely sat in for years, and looked at the cards and gifts and the evidence of people who cared, who showed up, who remembered. My life was smaller now, quieter, less powerful by any conventional measure, but it was fuller, deeper, more mine than it had ever been when I was running a company and managing crises and being needed by everyone except myself. I thought about the title of this story, about them thinking I'd beg, about taking everything, about me letting them win. But here's what I learned. They didn't take everything. They took the company. They took the position. They took the power and the prestige and the visible markers of success. But they couldn't take who I was, who I'd always been underneath the roles and responsibilities. They couldn't take my capacity to learn new things, to find joy in being terrible at painting, to build relationships with my grandchildren, to discover that there was life after usefulness. And I didn't let them win. I let them choose. I let them fail. I let them learn. And in doing that, in stepping back and allowing consequences and refusing to rescue and save and fix, I gave them, and myself, something more valuable than success. I gave us the possibility of becoming real, not perfect, not powerful, not impressive by anyone's standards, but our own, just real, just human, just people trying to figure out how to live and love and build things that matter in whatever time we have left. I'm 72 years old. I paint badly. I garden adequately. I read voraciously. I spend Saturday mornings with grandchildren who know me now, who call me Nana not because I'm diminished, but because I'm present. I live in a house that's paid for. I have enough money to be comfortable. I have friends and routines and a life that fits me instead of a life I'm trying to fit into. And I'm happy. Not the big dramatic happiness of achievement and recognition. The quiet happiness of mornings with coffee and books, of afternoons watching paint dry on canvases, of evenings knowing I showed up for my life today instead of spending it being what other people needed. They thought I'd beg when they took everything, but they didn't take everything. They took what they could see. I kept what mattered. And in the end, in the quiet of my small life, I won. Not against them, not over them, just for myself. Finally, completely, absolutely for myself. And that, I'm learning, is the only victory that ever really counts.